Hi, and welcome to another slightly different out and about video from us. This is going to be a short history of the Mitchell Library, really. So we went on a nighttime tour of the Mitchell Library just after Halloween, and unfortunately a lot of the footage that I captured and the audio from the footage is not great. It wasn't really usable. My phone's battery had been acting up and it seems to have corrupted some of the files. I don't know if it was the amount of things that I was trying to capture, but it was only for that night. My phone hasn't been like that since, because of course not. The tech gods, they love to mess with me. So this is what I've decided on, with a view to getting the information that was imparted to us out to you. So we'll see how it goes. Now, our tour started with our guide telling us that people often end up accidentally locked in the Mitchell Library, which with a couple of bottles of wine sounds like an awesome accident to have happen. She seemed to suggest some of the lock-ins maybe weren't so accidental, and those sound like my kind of people. Now, the library serves a hugely diverse community, which is what its founder Stephen Mitchell was intending for the legacy he left to the city of Glasgow. It wasn't just to be used by those in better situations or those with money or standing. Those people could afford to obtain their information. His vision was for the whole population of Glasgow to feel like they were able to access the information contained there. Mr. Mitchell himself was from the St Andrew's Square part of Glasgow, right by Glasgow Green, and his family made their money with cotton plantations in the colonies, so their money was really made off the back of slavery. It's not definite what percentage, but any amount can be looked down upon and somewhat tarnishes the funds. But that he would bequeath so much to the city of Glasgow on his death for the specific purposes of a free library for the city's citizens somewhat ameliorates this portion. There were subscription libraries at the time, but those were basically book clubs you'd pay perhaps a monthly fee to make use of. This made them unavailable resources to the majority of the working class at the end of the 19th century when our Mr. Mitchell died. That was in 1874. Our guide had said that by the end of his life, Stephen's wealth mainly came from the railways, though when looking him up he appears to have been mainly known as a tobacco merchant and would likely have been dubbed one of Glasgow's tobacco lords, along with Glassford in a former age. The Mitchell Library began in a premises on Ingram Street in Glasgow's city centre. £77,000 of Mr. Mitchell's money immediately went to procuring books to stock this new library. Now, for clarification, that's £7,358,134.45 in today's money, according to the Bank of England's inflation calculator. Now, it took me some amount of time looking through varying maps to find both a mention and exact location of its former home. At the time of Stephen Mitchell's death, the maps tell us that Ingram Street became Cannon Street at the Candle Rigs as late as 1882. By the time the Mitchell Library finds its temporary home, Cannon Street had become Ingram Street East. The library was located at number 7, so I knew it was at the High Street end. You tended to get city halls, banks, churches and public houses noted on some of the more detailed maps, and even positions of all of the trees, especially when it came to the Ordnance Survey ones, but they don't have a marker or notation for a library. I wondered if perhaps the authorities overseeing Mitchell's legacy knew from the get-go that Ingram Street would only be a temporary location, and therefore it was to be ignored on maps. I wasn't sure. It was interesting to have a good look at this one very specific area of the city and note the ways in which it had changed. As an interesting aside, I was wondering why the area I was specifically interested in kept coming up on the maps with a 6 in the middle of it. It wasn't a building number, and numbers 5 and 7 were quite a bit further away. And it turns out Glasgow was split up into separate ward divisions, likely for judicial oversight. The Mitchell's former home was in the Blackfriars division of Ward 6. Then, thanks to the National Library of Scotland, I came across Mollinson and Co.'s pictorial map of Glasgow, which I noticed had numbers assigned to the buildings. Now, the Union Bank of Scotland, which had been noted on the maps I'd seen previously, was located at 97 Ingram Street, and Hutchinson's Hospital was on the opposing side at number 52. So I figured the library would be located on the same side of the street as the bank, and would therefore have resided in the building assigned 122. When I went to the index, it turned out the library was actually listed and in the building assigned 120 on the other side of the street. This building is now, as you can see, an Italian restaurant. In my travels, attempting to find its former city centre location, I discovered a Mr. Francis Thornton Barrett, who seemed to be the library's main librarian. According to the Post Office Annual Directory for Glasgow, 1882 to 83, I looked him up and he was the first librarian of the Mitchell Library from 1877 to 99. He was also the first president of the Scottish Library Association. Our guide during our tour didn't go into so much detail on the Ingram Street location. I just felt I should impart the knowledge I gleaned while researching these things. Now, in 1900, however, while continuing to look through the maps of the area, I discovered the Mitchell Library, noted for seemingly the first time on one of John Bartholomew's maps on Miller Street. On having a wee look through some articles, it turns out that while it was originally opened in 1877 on Ingram Street, it moved to Miller Street in 1891. When Robert Jeffrey, a friend of our librarian Mr. Thornton Barrett, died in 1902, bequeathing his library of about 4,000 publications to the Mitchell Library, the council that oversaw the place made the decision in 1904 that larger accommodation was going to be necessary. The Mitchell Library was officially opened on North Street, Charing Cross, the location where it still stands today, on the 16th of October 1911. And this was after an architectural competition was held and won by William Whitey, a former employee of the Glasgow Corporation, and we were told that the corporation enjoyed assigning such things to staff or former employees, due to them having some semblance of control over them. His original plan didn't, however, include the copper dome it's known for having. A classical statue just called Literature sits atop it, which would appear to be of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Magazine, The Library World, Volume 14, Issue 5, published in 1911, held a piece on the opening of the Mitchell Library by Lord Rosebery, and I found it an interesting read and thought you may enjoy hearing it. It reads, "The speech made by Lord Rosebery at the opening of the new Mitchell Library at Glasgow on October 16th has provoked a great deal of interest in the question whether books can ever really be considered dead. Lord Rosebery, in endeavouring to avoid the Scylla of platitude, foundered on the Charybdis of exaggeration. I know," he said, "I ought to feel elated at the fact that there is this number of books compressed within these walls, and that a number of people will take advantage of them and read them. I ought to, but I do not. I feel an intense depression at this enormous mass of books, this cemetery of books, because, after all, most of them are dead. I should like to ask Mr. Barrett, in all his experience, how many really living books are there in all the Mitchell Library? How many time-proof books, I should rather call them weather-proof books, are there in all the Mitchell Library? You have told me it has 180,000 books. This morning I asked him if there were not 100,000 that nobody ever asked for, and he declined diplomatically to reply. But if it be true, and the percentage of living books be exceedingly small, and I am afraid we must all agree that it is very small, we cannot test the life of a book until after 2 or 3 generations have passed. If the number of living books is exceedingly small in proportion to the whole, what a huge cemetery of dead books or books half alive is represented by a great library like this. Of course, some of them are absolutely dead books that no human being out of a madhouse would ask for. Some are semi-living, some strayed reveller or wandering student may ask for them at some heedless or too curious a moment. The depressing thought to me in entering a great library of that kind is that in the main, most of the books are dead. Their barren backs, as it were, appeal for someone to come and take down and rescue them from the passive collection of dust and neglect into which most of them have deservedly fallen. Just think, what a great mass of disappointment, what a mass of wrecked hopes and lives is represented by a public library. Here you have folios which our generation cannot handle, novels as vapid as soda water, which has been open for a week, bales of sermons which have given satisfaction to no one but their authors, collections of political speeches even more evanescent than the sermons, bales of forgotten science, superseded history, biographies of people that nobody cares about. All these are the staple of the public library. They couldn't have got anyone more optimistic and more on side with the library to open the library. That's the speech he gave on opening the library. Not fantastic propaganda for the place. Now, there were parts of it we couldn't go in to see, such as the main reading hall, due to structural issues with the roof that are in the process of being resolved. The railway that runs through Charing Cross runs under the library and is responsible for building issues in the area. From what the guide was saying, every penny helps, and there's likely a way to donate and keep the place open and on the go for the future. Now, here used to be a ladies' reading room, as the opposing sexes couldn't be trusted to read in a room together without chaperones, perhaps. Regardless, those days are no more, and this area now accommodates the ladies' loos. Even the guide was saying she felt it was a wee bit over the top for an entrance to the ladies' toilets, but it makes sense when you realise the area was only lately put to its alternative purpose. We see a photograph of the laying of the foundation stone by Andrew Carnegie, despite not being a Carnegie library, for the North Street building we're in, and the guide's favourite person amongst the multitudes was one guy that moved and is not but a blur in the history of Glasgow now. We were shown another photograph which sported a ghost. He had to be pointed out to us, though everyone gave finding him a good try. Our guide stated she knew he was a ghost as she'd seen the original photograph and he wasn't in it. It had been decided that it was the ghost of a gentleman by the wonderful name of Septimus Pitt, city librarian for Glasgow from 1915 and the man behind the expansion of the Municipal Library, which was started in 1939. The picture I didn't quite catch to the left of our ghosty photo is one that I had to really go searching for. There are examples of it online, but the resolution was terrible. And it was actually the National Archives and Library of Scotland that provided the pictures. So thank you to them. It looks to have been taken at the time of the St Andrew's Hall's fire. Now, this isn't something our guide addressed, and I only realised the Mitchell had a lucky miss in 1962. A boxing match had been held in the halls shortly before the fire. It was quickly assigned to a carelessly dropped lit cigarette, and the Mitchell would appear to have been saved only due to the fact a firewall had been built between the two buildings during the war in an attempt to mitigate incendiary bomb damage. This was the St Andrew Halls before and after the fire. The Municipal Library was extended into the space left by the former halls while retaining its Granville Street facade and opened in 1980. Oh my goodness! What is this guy?
Lately, I've been feeling a bit poorly. How do I look?
So, the library is in the comments here.
So thank you very much for joining me for this odd out and about condensed history of the Municipal Library. I want to thank the National Library of Scotland for the images because trying to find them in Google searches was impossible. It was terrible resolution, copyright issues everywhere. They're just barriers. So they were exceptionally helpful for this video. The maps are also from their store as well. And I was trying to find pictures of the Mitchell Library and maybe some pictures of the inside of it, and kept coming up with the same problems. It's not super well documented online, out with the archives and the libraries and what have you. They don't tend to come up in Google searches, you know. But I was sat thinking, I'm sure I have a book that might help me out here. And I remembered I have a book literally called Municipal Glasgow, and it's published in 1915, 4 years after the library opened. So surely it must be able to help us out. And this is the book. I did find it. It is such a good book. I freaking love this book because it's so illustrated. It's amazing. So the Mitchell Library, we have libraries, a whole chapter, and it has the pictures, really nice clean like line drawings and photographs. There's the main reading room, which you've seen in the video. They have a couple that I didn't include as well. So we've got the magazine room, and Anderson Library, I think, as well. The Anderson Library is attached. It's kind of to the side of the Mitchell Library. It has its own entrance, and that was obviously off the back of another person's, Mr. Anderson's collection, no doubt. So yeah, I thought I would share that with you. And thank you very much for joining me once again, and we may see you for the next one. Take care.